Welcome back to the Lettermen Lounge, ladies and gentlemen. Mick Walker on the other side of your screen. I'm Spencer Holbrook. We're going to talk Ohio State recruiting. I know last week was National Signing Day, but that doesn't mean recruiting just stops because when one cycle ends, the next begins. Today's show is brought to you by Five Star Fans. The thrill, the heartbreak, the pride. Being a fan is a wild ride. With Five Star Fans, you can finally get in the game like never before. Five Star Fans is the place with fiercely loyal fans who can directly reward their favorite players. For a limited time, Five Star Fans is giving you $5. That's right, $5 to send to your favorite player. Visit 5-starfans.com today. Give $5 to your favorite player. Mick, how are you?
I'm doing great, Spencer. I always like to check your finger right now after Thanksgiving to make sure you're doing better. But you told me on Monday that it's starting to get better, so that's the good news. That's the good news heading into this kind of the slow week before we really ramp up into Tennessee stuff and before recruiting gets going.
Yeah, it's almost college football playoff time. It's pretty crazy that it's 2 weeks instead of like a month off in between, the last game of the year and the semifinal. Now it's the 12 team. We're getting first round games at home. Ohio State going to host Tennessee. We'll get it out of the way first before we get anywhere else, before we get any further. Ohio State cannot host recruits for the first round matchup against Tennessee. Can recruits buy tickets on their own and just show up? Yes, but Ohio State cannot contact them while they're there. They cannot take them on visits. They cannot take them down the tunnel, get pictures from Lettermen Row's Mick Walker. They cannot give them food. They can't give them tickets. Ohio State cannot do anything with recruits as it pertains to a home game in the college football playoff. Just to get that out of the way. But, Mick, before they get into the week of the college football playoff, before they get into game week, they can host kids this upcoming week, and that's what they're going to do with a big-time target and one that might have Ohio State fans, that's you listening, saying, is this going to be deja vu all over again? Because, Mick, go ahead with the details.
Yeah, a lot of the old Michael Scott meme. I'm ready to get hurt again with this guy. Earlier this week, he posted Jackson Cantwell, 5-star offensive tackle, 5-star plus offensive tackle from Nixa, Missouri, number one offensive tackle on 3 and in the on 3 industry rankings, announced earlier this week that he's going to be at Ohio State on Saturday, 14th. He's also making a trip to Michigan. I believe it's the following day or maybe the day before. I could be wrong. But he will be seeing Ohio State and Michigan this weekend. And he's a guy that he included Ohio State in his top schools list a few months back, has had interest in Ohio State, but just never visited. So this will be his first trip up. He told Chad Simmons after the visit was announced that, hey, I'm going to take some more visits to these schools. So these will be the last ones I see before I really cut down my list. So if you're Ohio State, this is kind of your one opportunity to make the cut for the top list. He's visited just about every SEC program. Missouri, obviously, the home state school. It's where his dad, I believe, threw for the Tigers track and field team. So there's a Missouri tie, but he's also been to Alabama a couple times, Georgia a couple times. I think Miami got him on campus. I mean, we can be frank about it. I think NIL will play a factor in this, as it will with most 5-star offensive tackles. So Ohio State's obviously got to get their ducks in a row when it comes to this first visit and hopefully continue to stay in it to get a couple more visits before he ultimately makes a decision.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because, look, this could happen for the next 35 recruiting cycles, and Ohio State's still going to take a swing at 5-star tackles. Like they missed on quite a few of them in the 2021 class. They missed on quite a few of them in the 2022 class. Then they missed on quite a few of them in the 2023 class. 24 class, same deal in the 25 class. Of course, David Sanders, the latest in that. Jordan Seaton was 24. I believe there was a J.C. Latham ordeal in 2021.
Brandon Baker would be in that 24 class. But if there's one thing we can draw that's a little bit different, you mentioned, obviously, what for most of these cycles, we can point out David Sanders in 25, and then you can point out Jordan Seaton in 20 and 24. Like as you kind of get down on these numbers, you see one guy. Ohio State's now hosting Jackson Cantwell, which is the number one offensive tackle. They got Emmanuel Iheanacho, I believe is how you say it, along those lines, from Georgetown Prep out there in Maryland. He camped this summer. I would not be surprised if he returns at some point this spring. So Ohio State seemingly is starting to expand the board and try and take more swings. Obviously, if you recruit a couple 5-star offensive tackles, that improves your chances of landing one of them, so long as you have everything in order and you can get them all on campus. So that does seem to be a slight change as they're going after both the current 5-star offensive tackles in the 26 class, not just one.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting because, again, Ohio State is not going to stop taking these swings on these five-star tackles. It's just not going to happen. They're Ohio State. They're going to keep recruiting these guys. And eventually they think if they keep taking the swings, they're going to land one or two or all of them. Who knows? But the Buckeyes are pretty confident when it comes to offensive line recruiting, even though they don't have many reasons right now to be. They are. And so that's just interesting, Mick. That is kind of the news of the day. Not much else happening in that 26 cycle right now, but Ohio high school football did just end its season. Neither of our alma maters played in the state championships, and that's okay. But Marion Local set a new record with a 74-0 win in the state championship game. That program is absolutely incredible. We're not going to talk too much about them, but I did want to give them a shout out. I think it's 65 straight wins. Just remarkable what Tim Goodwin has built there. I know I heard somebody say, "Can Tim Goodwin coach at Ohio State?" And I don't know if we should go that far, but the man knows ball, and he knows how to get that program on the right track every single year. It's a model of consistency in the state. That's not what we're here to talk about, though. I did want to give them a shout out before we get into it. Nick, you watched a lot of Ohio State targets there in Canton at Tom Benson Hall of Fame Stadium, if I'm not mistaken. What were your big takeaways there? I know you saw some Ohio State targets, some guys who could be in the mix for offers down the road. Of course, when summer camps happen, things like that. What did you take away from those games?
Yeah, the 2026 class in Ohio is full of DB talent, and that was kind of on display this weekend. First game of the weekend was Avon versus Anderson, which featured 4-star on 300 defensive back Jacob Witherspoon. Ohio State hosted for 4 games this season. Went to more home games than even I did. I only went to 3. Jacob went to 4. But I didn't get to catch up with them after Avon finished their season undefeated, beat Anderson to win a state title. Big congratulations to the Eagles. They were able to get that job done. I know it was very exciting for them. I know from talking to him, though, kind of in passing, we didn't do anything off the record. He's obviously very high on Ohio State, has a good relationship with Tim Walton. Every time he's visited, he's spoke even higher of Tim Walton. Also, Garen Duhart, a guy that kind of knows, obviously Toledo and Cleveland area are different, but kind of knows the high school football and the level that Jacob has kind of played throughout his high school career, which gave him a good leveling point. So that's one guy that I think Ohio State fans should pay very close attention to. We already talk about him a lot on the Lettermen Row message board. But he's a guy that I think as we get into spring and this offseason, he could be somebody that makes a decision sooner rather than later because of all his visits he's taken to Ohio State, but not also to Penn State and some of these other schools. He made a trip to Wisconsin as well this season. He was a big headliner on Thursday. Then you move into Friday. Friday morning, like you said, was the big 64-0 win for Marion Local. And then the afternoon game was Toledo Central Catholic versus Bishop Watterson, a rematch of last year's Division III state title game. And this time, Bishop Watterson flipped it on their head. And we'll talk about winners first. You mentioned camp guys. Pete Iglesias, I believe is how you say his last name, the left tackle for Watterson. Would not be surprised if we see him camp at Ohio State and work his way maybe to an offer. Big 6'7", 290-pound guy. Any of these in-state offensive linemen, there's going to be maybe close to double-digit offensive linemen that go Big Ten or around Power 4 level in 26 in Ohio. So Ohio State obviously needs to make sure they're taking the right amount of guys and then taking the top of the group from that. Across the field was Victor Singleton from Central Catholic. We've talked about him a couple times on here. I included him in my mock class that again is over on Lettermen Row. On Lettermen Row, you guys sign up. I don't know what kind of Spencer can kind of inject what kind of current deal we have going on, but go over there and sign up. You can read the offense and the defensive side of it all. Vic, again, they lost, so it was hard catching up with him, but I know he's looking at potentially visiting Ohio State this spring, and those were the big time targets. And then I'm gonna get a drink of water and pass this over to Spencer, and we can talk about the other key target that was there in the Friday night game.
Yeah, the deal on LettermenRow.com right now is $1 for your first 7 days. Come on, guys. That gets you almost the college football playoff. You're going to want to subscribe after that. So just become a member there. It sounds like the Buckeyes can, and in all likelihood will, take the offensive line and just make it an Ohio extravaganza here. Obviously, they're going to take the swings like we talked about with Jackson Cantwell. They're going to talk to Ianacho from down in the South. I think they're going to talk to a couple other big-time prospects. But, if you build this entire thing out of 2026, nobody's going to complain because there's some really good talent there. So, if you can add even more bodies into that mix from the state of Ohio who played in those state championship games, who know what it's like to win, hey, I'm all for it, man.
Yeah, we've seen 4 in-state offers go out. Sam Greer, Max Riley, Adam Guthrie, Will Conway would be those 4 guys. I would not be surprised if we see one or two more. I think Pete has a chance, who I mentioned earlier. Eli Sanchez, who played for Sandusky Perkins in the finale game, the Division IV state championship game. He's a very interesting guy as a guard prospect, mean, nasty mauler, a guy that I think a lot of Ohio State fans would like to watch. I think he's kind of right on that edge of being Ohio State caliber. And then there's a few other guys within the state that I think have the potential to earn an offer. And another one of those guys, if we move away from the offensive line, that has the potential to earn the offer is Matt Ponatoski, the quarterback from Archbishop Moeller. On threes, very high on top, number 109, I believe, in the on 300. He's a guy that Charles Power is really big on. He's also a guy that a lot of baseball evaluators are really big on, one of the top 10 baseball prospects in the 26 class. So that kind of muddies the waters with this recruitment. But he won Mr. Football last week, which is a big honor as a junior. He threw for over 4,000 yards and over 50 touchdowns in 15 games. So you can do the math, but that's about, a lot of yards and a lot of touchdowns per game on a per game basis. Ohio State hosted him for the Michigan game. I believe that was his first visit to the Ohio State football facility. I think the baseball staff might have got him on campus a time or two before that. But when it comes to the football side, I think Chip Kelly went out and saw him during the first bye week, I believe, or maybe the second. It might have been the second, because that's when he saw Tavian St. Clair as well. I would be paying close attention to Matt Ponatoski in the spring, just for a potential offer, a guy that they can bring and evaluate in the spring evaluation time, or they can bring him on camp. Another guy, obviously, is Nathan Bernard, who we talked about, visited for the Indiana game. He was recently named first team All-Ohio for Division III, I believe, or Division IV. Those two guys in-state would be two guys I pay attention to, but Ponatoski played on Friday. Was probably his worst game of the season, but still had a couple of good throws. And Moeller's loss to Olentangy Liberty in the Division I state title game. Congrats to the Patriots.
I'm interested in this quarterback thing, Nick, because they've obviously got a 5-star do-it-all guy in 25 signed with Tavian St. Clair. He's the future of the program, right? Then they have 2027. They've got a future of the program signal caller from out in California, Brady Edmonds, locked up. And like, if you've seen anything from Brady's childhood, like, he ain't going anywhere. Like that's a Buckeye. Like, he's going to be at Ohio State as long as Ryan Day's at Ohio State. So and maybe even beyond, like maybe regardless, because he's an Ohio State fan from Southern California. So I'm interested in what they do to sandwich those two with the 2026 class. Could it end up being like and obviously Tavian rose up and became a 5-star, but could it be like one of those things where when Tavian and Ryan Montgomery both camped at Ohio State, and one of them earned an offer, one of them, or one of them got the go ahead to commit, one of them didn't, like Nathan Bernard and Matt Ponatoski, like, could that be something that we look at? Is that something that, like, are these guys good enough for that? And I know that it's hard to evaluate right now, but also these guys just wrapped up their junior year. They've only got one more year to kind of show that they could be the quarterback in the 26 class for Ohio State.
Yeah, and then obviously the big name guy that everybody's going to ask about is Jared Curtis. I mentioned it on the Lettermen Lounge message board, but Spencer and I are going to be making a trip down to Nashville, I believe, here in the next month or so. When that time comes, I'm going to at least make an attempt to go see Jared and try and get some more, because he's a guy that really only talks in person at this point, kind of dealing with different things and how large his recruitment is with some of these power players. So excited to kind of get more on him. I think he's obviously the top of the board. He's the top, maybe one of the top quarterbacks in the country in the 2026 class. So obviously he's high on Ohio State's board. There's other guys out of state that they're evaluating also. They've been evaluating guys all season. They hosted a couple guys. I imagine there's still guys that they've offered that are committed to other schools that they're still working on. Obviously, you have a guy like Brady Smeagol, who was the first 26 quarterback that Chip Kelly offered at Ohio State. He committed to Florida State over the summer. Then you have the coaching change at Florida State. Does he now have more interest in listening to Chip Kelly and the Buckeyes and Ohio State and Ryan Day? I don't know, but that's a guy that I think you would probably continue to check up on. The quarterback search, like you said, is going to be fascinating because you have to find a way to kind of bridge the gap between Tavian St. Clair and Brady Edmonds, but also make sure you have plenty of depth. So when Tavian gets on campus, or when the guy of Julian Sand or any of these guys do play, you have plenty of depth, because as we saw in the Michigan game, that can be important even if it's in spots.
Yeah, no, I agree. Some other guys that you saw, Mick, Elbert Hill played, right? I think they lost, right? The first game.
They lost to Avon. Avon and Jacob Witherspoon took them out the previous week. We were at that game. The big thing with Hoban, obviously, Elbert plays defense. He's rated as a corner. He's a great offensive player, too. I think they're just kind of finding ways to get the ball in his hands. And He's visited Ohio State double-digit times, I imagine. We talked about Jackson Cantwell coming, and there's guys that I will check up on, and I imagine there's more 26 guys they're probably working under the radar to get on campus here soon. One or two guys, like I know Max Riley and his dad Dan are working very hard to get to a a bowl practice or a CFP practice in the meantime. So I imagine there's some of these in-state guys as you get into the winter breaks and times where you can kind of take days to go down to Columbus and make the trip. I imagine we'll see more guys visit, especially when you have a guy like Albert Hill who's visited double-digit times. He popped up in July without anybody really knowing. Same with Jacob Witherspoon. I would not be surprised if we see more guys this weekend or in the next coming weeks. But yeah, Albert Hill's another guy, Sam Greer, who I think they would love to be able to get as the first offensive lineman in the class, 6'8", 290-pound offensive tackle. And I put it on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, earlier today, but did a whole complete junior season, no injuries, which is big for him after dealing with some as a junior and a freshman. So I would expect some of those top in-state guys get on campus in these next couple of weeks and get more time around the coaching staff, kind of see how they're preparing for the Tennessee game. And like you said, no recruits for that Tennessee game, but I'd have to double check, and this is something maybe Spencer can elaborate on, is with some of these guys like Tavian St. Clair or some of these signees, I imagine we could very likely still see them on campus or in the stadium because of them being signees. I'm not entirely sure about that, but that's something that I think you at least have to consider or look at.
Yeah, we'll do some digging on it because it's brand new. So the rules surrounding all of this are different. And, Ohio State doesn't have its normal Ohio State licensed goalpost covers on the bottom of the goalpost. It's a college football playoff one. All of the signage in A deck and B deck have to be covered because it's college football playoff signage, not Ohio State's. So that's interesting to me. So, the recruiting rules are the same thing. 5 years from now, we'll know all of this stuff. But this year it's like, are you guys allowed to do this? Actually, we don't know. Is this one of the perks of hosting a game? No, it's not. Okay. I think they should be allowed to host recruits because, next weekend, Oregon's going to be allowed to host recruits, in just normal settings. So why can't Ohio State host them?
Yeah. It's been a long running thing because I went back and double checked. For those of you guys don't know, I covered Purdue, but I also covered Cincinnati for a time. And at one point, the AAC plays their conference championship games at home. And when Cincinnati beat Houston a handful of years ago to lock up their spot to go to the college football playoff, they beat them in Nippert Stadium down there in Cincinnati, but no recruits in that as well. It's just any postseason type of play. Army over the weekend, who I believe won the AAC, no recruits on their campus as well. Obviously, they would do things differently. But that's just a whole postseason rule that, like you said, I imagine as time goes on and if Oregon is able to get guys on campus for a junior day type of setting and you get more of an actual feel and idea of how these game days can run, maybe that rule changes, especially when you have these home sites, because originally the rule was in place for bowl games and postseason conference games. It changes when it's another home game,
Yeah. Yeah. So, Nick, I've got a couple guys because let's just make this like an in-state thing because we've talked about some of the guys in the state championship games. I've got a couple guys that I just want to ask you about just off the cuff that I didn't really plan to do. But we'll do transfer portal stuff, and I do want to get this out there. We'll do transfer portal stuff on Thursday at Lettermen Row. We're going to do maybe a transfer portal show, just like what we're hearing, things like that. Because I still want to hear back from a couple people before I say anything out loud. That not that I'm not supposed to, but that to confirm some things. You know how it goes. Let me ask you about. Oh, there was a RPM put in for Sean Alston to go to USC. What's the deal with his recruitment and what's going on there? Is he a player that Ohio State likes? Is this a recruitment that's not going to go Ohio State's way no matter what? What's the deal there? Because you see an in-state guy keep trending toward USC. That's kind of odd.
Yeah, I think he's a guy that Ohio State hosted, I believe, it was the Nebraska or the Iowa game, one of the two big October home games that they had. He was on campus. Carlos Laughlin made a stop to see him before he went to Bo Jackson's game during the second bye week. So there's been interest in Carlos. Laughlin's made contact, had different things. I believe he visited him in the spring during the evaluation period. So that's a couple trips up to Painesville Harvey High School. Sean Alston made a trip down here, like I said, for a game, but he never camped. And I think that's one thing that's pretty big. He was injured throughout the summer. I believe Ohio State would have liked to see him in a camp setting. You get to kind of coach him up. You get to, and especially on those days, Spencer's been on the sidelines for him. I've been on the sidelines for him. Those are long days in the heat. So even if your guys aren't fully able to go through drills or you're not even having them do a ton of drills, it's a kind of a mental, it's an endurance type of thing to see how you're going to handle kind of the coaching of Ohio State and the stress that goes into it. So that's something. He didn't camp, but I do think the Buckeyes like him. I think Sean's trying to make an earlier decision, though. He sent me a message a while back, something about December 28th. I'm not completely sure if that was for a top schools list or a commitment. I can't remember what he told me, but I know there's some idea of maybe something at the end of December. So if that's the case, Ohio State obviously hasn't offered him, and I think they would like to see more. maybe in whether that's the spring evaluation period or a camp this summer. They've shown interest, but just never really really shown enough to give them an offer. And obviously, like we've talked about in the past, they have got some big national running backs up on campus. And after what Ohio State did on the 25 class, landing those 3 running backs, I think they're confident that Carlos Loughlin can kind of reel in some big fish.
Let me go to Storm Miller. What do you know about Storm Miller?
Yeah, he's another guy. I'll give it away a little bit. We did include him in the mock class. I feel confident about him kind of ending up on Ohio State. It's interesting. His brother is a guy that I imagine Ohio State would love to have right now. Missed out on him in the 22 class. Has now been a multi-year starter. Blake Miller for Clemson at, I believe, right tackle. Likely going to head off to the NFL draft after the season to be a highly drafted tackle, probably for second, third round type of player. But I feel Ohio State's in a much better position for Storm than they ever were for Blake. I think Blake likes the small town kind of campus feel of Clemson. I think Storm is much more intrigued about playing on a big stage like Ohio State, getting coached by James Laurinaitis. And he visited for a game this season. He recently cut down his list to, I believe, the top 7. And he's another guy that I think whether it's March, April, May, early spring into the offseason, I think he can make it big, make his commitment before we get into official visits. And I really like where Ohio State sits. The other interesting thing is he's close with Sincere Johnson, the other talented in-state linebacker from Cleveland Glenville. Those two are pretty close. They trained together, and to some extent they worked out together. They were at the same camp when Storm earned the offer. Sincere earned his this season. But I think Storm's a guy that they really like, and they're in a good spot for. It's kind of waiting it out. He's considering Clemson. I think he also has Wisconsin on the list, but I consider it Ohio State Clemson right now.
Okay. Let me give you a couple more because this is good. Oh, you included Favor Aki. Did I say that correctly?
I think it's Favor Akeem, but yes.
Okay, my bad. The running back from Delaware Hayes, you included him in the mock class. We'll give away a little bit. Go to the lettermenrow.com, get a membership right now. Become a member. You can see Mick's mock 2026 class. It's got all the buildings to be a really good class, like maybe even like top 3, maybe pushing for the number 1 class. And there's a lot of Ohio flavor in there. A lot of flavor of Ohio with Favor in there. So go ahead, Mick.
Yeah, I think Favor's one of 2 in-state guys that I included that don't currently have offers. I just think he checks a lot of boxes for Ohio State. The problem is there's just not a ton known about him. They hosted him for, I believe that was the Nebraska game because it was right there towards the end of the regular season. He visited for the first time right before he kind of blew up. He was, I think, the week prior, earlier in that week, he was included in the newest On 300 update for the 2026 class. He's a 4-star by On 3. I think he might be a 4-star in the industry, or he's close to it. He's somebody that Ohio State is very much checking in on, and I think has the traits. He's right around 6 foot, 190 pounds. If you go to his profile or just look at any pictures of him, he's a pretty well-built dude. He also has sub-11 second speed in the 100-meter dash, which for those of you guys that might not have the comparisons or the idea of it, that's pretty fast. Anything for Ohio State guys, most guys that are Ohio State caliber that run track are running sub-11. Jacob Witherspoon is a guy that goes sub-11. I don't know if Elbert Hill has run track in a couple of years, but I believe when he did, he was sub-11. Vic Singleton, the other defensive back we mentioned, he's a long jumps champion in the state of Ohio. So a lot of these skill positions, you'll see big track numbers, and Favor has those. I think he's just somebody that when it comes to the spring evaluation period, Ohio State would like to see again. And also, I think he would be a guy that's interested enough to camp at Ohio State, and that would be a big thing for him. Penn State offered this spring or throughout this season. Iowa State's another school that's high on his list, but I just think I have a feeling there's going to be something more between Ohio State and Favor, so that's why I kind of included him on the list. And I think he's a guy that will continue to blow up this offseason because he's put up big numbers as a junior, and people are starting to find out more about him off the field and personally as well.
All right, last one, then we'll get out of here. Max Riley.
Yeah, we mentioned Ohio State Clemson for what is it, Storm Miller. I think this is another Ohio State Clemson battle for Max Riley. There's some buzz about Clemson lately. I think some people have talked him up. The more I continue to talk to Dan, his dad, I think Ohio State is still in a good spot. I think there just might be a little bit of a feeling of, hey, Clemson was his last visit, so hey, they're kind of sticking out. Maybe you get him back on campus for one of these CFP practices and kind of get an idea of how he's looking and how he's feeling. I texted you. I think his junior season was good. I don't think he would be happy with how he played consistently. They kind of had to shuffle him around a lot, and when you're the only real power for offensive lineman, it makes you kind of put the large amount of chip on your shoulder, a large amount of weight that you have to carry. So I think overall, I think Ohio State's in a good position there. It's just about kind of getting him back on campus to stave off some of the Clemson attempts. He's a guy that I think Ohio State would like to have in the class, but Clemson's going to fight. And if for some reason they do lose out on him, I think, again, there's guys in the state of Ohio that are very talented. Eli Sanchez, who I talked about from Sandusky Perkins, could be another camp guy or spring evaluation period guy that can earn an offer. They're about the same size. They all train together. Max, Eli, Cardillo, I believe, trained there a little bit, but Luke Montgomery and the Armstrong twins all train up at T3, which is up in Avon, Ohio with Dale Roddick, and they do a good job up there with offensive line play. I think Justin Fry is a big fan of what they do up there too, so that could help Eli's case. I think it helps Max's case, and obviously knowing how they train up there is a big thing. I think Ohio State's in a good spot for Max Riley. It's just about getting him on campus if we wrap it up there.
That is where we wrap it up, Mick, because that's a good in-state look. Obviously, Jackson Cantwell's visit, we're going to be tracking that at lettermenrow.com. We're going to have a lot more about the state championships, I assume, from Mick, because he's going to start really diving into that 2026 class. Could be a lot of Ohio flavor in there, like I said. And then we'll obviously be covering a little bit of 2027 because it's going to start to pick up. Camp season right around the corner, 6 months until camp season. Does that make you a little nervous, Mick? There's a lot of time between them, but also it's going to feel like it comes pretty quickly.
Yeah, I love camp season, so I'm excited for that. I'm already looking at some of the Under Armour and the other big off-season camps that we have on the schedule, whether that's the Ohio one or they do some ones in Atlanta and whatnot that I'll look at considering going to, depending on the different guys that could be in attendance. They do one in Baltimore and New Jersey. That's always pretty good because Ohio State consistently recruits the East Coast. So it's already starting to look at some of these off-season camps. Like I said, we're going to make a trip to Nashville, which will be interesting, looking at maybe making a trip to San Antonio for the All-American Bowl. So we got a lot of stuff going on that we'll have more recruiting info. But like you said, in the meantime, the big buzz is transfer portal. And don't worry, we're just because it's team or recruiting, we are both working. Everybody's working. Me, Spencer, Alex, Weidman, all of the team at Lettermen Row, even up to Pete Nakos and Steve Wilfong. Everybody on 3 is working hard for this transfer portal stuff. And we've had some good scoop over here about maybe a top safety visiting here soon. I think Spencer we'll get into more with Tim, but I think there's an offensive lineman that'll be on campus here in the near future. But so all that'll be over at Lettermen Row on the Lettermen Lounge message board. So we'll have you guys covered.
Absolutely, we will. And then obviously, we're 10 days away from Ohio State, Tennessee, and the college football playoff in the Horseshoe. Tennessee fans think they're going to take over the Horseshoe. I think they are not going to take over the Horseshoe. We're taking over. And we're getting out of here. That's Mick Walker on the other side of your screen. I'm just Spencer Holbrook. We're not really taking over anything. We just like to cover Ohio State football and talk about recruiting. For Mick Walker, I'm just Spencer Holbrook. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll see you guys over in the Lettermen Lounge message board. We'll see you at lettermenrow.com. We'll see you back in the Lettermen Lounge podcast feed and on YouTube next week for another edition of the Lettermen Lounge. We'll talk Ohio State recruiting.